Put your hands together and welcome Dr. Reynold Agard to this. Give him a nice Northeast Region Church of God of Prophecy welcome.
It's truly a privilege to be here this morning. And I want to say when I entered, I felt the presence of God in this place. But there is something about, I go throughout the United States and throughout the world to do medical missions and to even do programs like these. So when I got the call to come, I said, whatever the bishop says, whenever he says jump, I just say how high. That's how much I love him and his lovely wife. But what I must say, as I listen to, the program, as you present concerns for the immigrants, as you present concerns for the poor, you must be the people of God. This doesn't just come like that, because a lot of times, we get all we can and we can all we get and we sit on the lid. And even as the sister was talking about the poor, I'm reminded that the Bible says that he that giveth to the poor, you lend to the Lord. And when you lend to the Lord, God owes you something. And we know the Bible said, beloved, I wish above all things that you prosper and be in health, even as your soul prosper. So I'm thankful for the opportunity that I could be with fellow Christians as we share concerns about health. And any organization that really cares about its people cares about its health. And this is the reason why this is a part of this program. I teach doctors in Delaware, and one of the things that we try to let them know, we can give all the knowledge. God has blessed us these days. This is the age of information with a lot of knowledge. But I tell them that a lot of time, patients don't really care how much you know, but how much you care. There's a favorite story of mine. George Washington, one day he was riding with 5 other riders along the Potomac River. And in the distance, there was a stranger who wanted to get across the river. It was a cold December morning. It was freezing. The river was freezing. The only way to get across the river was on horseback. And as the 6 riders approached the stranger, you would think that if he really wants to get across the river, he would ask the 6 of them so that his chances can be improved that he could get across the river. So as the first rider approached, the stranger didn't ask him anything. The second rider passed by, and he didn't say anything. The third and the fourth rider passed by, and the stranger said not a mumbling word. Then the 5th rider passed by. The stranger didn't ask him anything. The 6th rider was George Washington. And as he approached the stranger turned to George Washington and said, "Sir, can I get a ride across the river?" So George Washington looked at him and said, "There were 5 riders. 5 of my friends were before me, and I noticed you didn't ask them anything." And he said, "Sir, I looked in their faces, and I didn't see love." When we talk about compassion this morning, can our neighbors, can our friends, can our family see that love of Christ in you? That when Christ healed, he was always moved with compassion. Can he see that in the Church of God of Prophecy? Can they see that in your faces this morning? I wish that God will impress on us that as we talk about the poor and as we talk about the immigrants and we talk about people who look different than us, that we would always be moved with compassion. Let them see that love of Christ in your faces. And I know I didn't come here to preach this morning, but I pray that God would bless us as we think about our health. You know, why is it important that we talk about health? You know, the Apostle Paul mentioned that our bodies are the temple of the living God. I was at a conference about 2 weeks ago, and one of the pastors mentioned that he saw one of his members, whether it was a visitor, maybe a visitor, because we know that Christians don't smoke cigarettes, right? So this visitor was outside of the church, you know, just shivering as he tried to smoke his cigarette. So the pastor said, "Why are you out here? Go inside and smoke." Because a lot of us think the church is the temple, is the building, and not considering that the Apostle Paul said, "What? You don't know that your body is the temple of the living God?" And that's why we do what we do in terms of health. This is God's body. And even as we get together, I want you to remember that your body is the temple of the living God. As I share with you, what I'm going to try to do is give you some basic information about health, but I would hope that we could leave some time that you could ask some questions, because I could talk here for the entire day about health. There's a lot of information that I could share, but sometimes it might not mean anything to you. So when we get together time for questions, I want you to ask your question. It might be something that you are concerned, and I also will be around for the rest of the day to answer and, you know, personalized questions. So I don't want you to really put your business on the street, right? But sometimes you can ask a question and you could say, you know somebody who knows somebody, all right? And certainly we could have your questions answered. Right now in America, there's approximately 100,000 centurions. Let me see the hands of all those who would like to live to be 100 years old. All right, the majority of us. When I asked my patients that, they said, you know, I want to live to be that long, but I want to be in my right mind. And there are things that you could do that, you know, to obtain that. So there's 100,000 centurions in America right now. They anticipate that number would grow to 500,000 in the next 30 years. Whenever I'm doing this program, especially to a men's group, you know, it brings it home to us. Because of that 100,000, 87% are women. So only 13% of men live to be 100. That's not a good thing for us, Bishop. You know. And there are several reasons. One of the reasons is that men don't go to the doctor. Do you know that? And even when they go to the doctor, they're in and out, they don't ask questions. The majority of men who go to the doctor is either their wives or their mom or their girlfriend that tell them you should go to the doctor. It's not uncommon for a male to come and show me a little spot on his hand that he's concerned about or on his face. And then, you know, he goes back home and his wife said, "Did you tell him that you were having chest pain?" That was not important. So we don't go to the doctor and we don't ask questions. So when they did the demographics, generally, white women live the longest. And this is followed by black women, and then followed by white male, and at the bottom is black male. And there's a reason for that. When they look at the demographics, one of the reasons is white women, they go to the doctor, they ask questions, because women generally ask questions. I mean to say, sometimes, you know, when they come to my office, I'm wondering, do I limit how much questions they ask? But, you know, I'm the type of person, you know, when you come to I listen to you. So they ask questions, they go to the doctor, and they have money. Black women, they go to the doctor too, because women generally go to the doctor. And they do ask questions, but they don't have money. White males, they don't go to the doctor either, but they have money. Black males, they don't go to the doctor, they don't ask questions, and they don't have money. So we are in a terrible predicament. But I want you to know, when you look at the things that cause disease and death, I want to focus a little bit on cardiovascular disease. A lot of times, many of us, we are scared. We are scared whenever you go to the doctor, and if he says the word C, the word that disease that begins with C, cancer, there is a sense of urgency. So if you see a spot or you feel something, that creates urgency. But when you think of the statistics, approximately 500,000 people die in the US every year from all the cancers combined. So it's really not your biggest problem, because more than 1 million people die from cardiovascular disease. So you are more likely to die, have a heart attack or a stroke from the diseases that are associated with diabetes, high blood pressure, and cholesterol. You are more likely to die from these diseases. I'll share with you some colleagues and some friends. So these are not statistics that I'm reading about. Just about 6 months ago, one of my colleagues, 52 years old, he went to the airport to pick up his wife. While he was waiting in his car, the plane landed. She called him. She said, "Honey, I'm here," landed safely. She has to go through custom, immigration, and, get her bags. By the time she came out to the car in Philadelphia in the airport, he was in a body bag. It can happen. It doesn't take much. Cardiovascular disease. It doesn't take much to have a heart attack or a stroke. But a lot of these things can be prevented, because you cannot just take your health for granted. In the Philadelphia Marathon about 5 years ago, there were 2 runners. One was a 40-year-old gentleman and a 21-year-old Drexel University student who actually ran the marathon, crossed the finish line, and he collapsed and died. Half mile out, the 40-year-old died. So cardiovascular disease, it is important that we take care of these diseases. Diabetes, high blood pressure, and strokes. They all can be prevented, but if God forbid that we are stricken by these diseases, we can do something about them by our lifestyle. But you have to make a commitment to lifestyle change. Unfortunately, some of us are born with certain genetic tendencies, and we know that this is all a result of sin. That we have these genetic tendencies, but you got to know your numbers. You got to know information about your health. So gentlemen, let it be that these, we can increase the statistics of men who live to be 100 years old, because we have followed the heathen of Paul when he said that our bodies are the temple of the living God. I just want to share with you high blood pressure. It's one of the most common diseases among us. Now, when you ask what's the ideal blood pressure, we normally say 120/80 as ideal. But there's a consensus statement that says the ideal blood pressure, it's the lowest blood pressure that you could have without any symptoms. So it's not a hard number, because when you think of what blood pressure is, it's the pressure that the heart has to push against to deliver oxygen and nutrition. It delivers blood to the brain and to the rest of the body. So when the pressure is high, and that's why it's called a silent killer, because a lot of times you would not know that this is happening. If it gets to the point where it's so high that you start feeling sick, you are already in a crisis. It's the leading cause of strokes. It's also the leading cause of, one of the leading cause of kidney failure. So we must have that checkup. And if you don't want to go to the doctor, just go to the pharmacy. Some of these pharmacies have little things that you can push your arm in, and even they might not be as accurate as we would like them to be, but they give you a ballpark figure as to where you should be. And then if your blood pressure is high, even if you don't want to go to doctor, a simple thing that you could do is cut back on the salt intake. Because a lot of us, we eat too much salt. For us who come from the Caribbean, as a matter of fact, I went to medical school at Penn State. And when I went to, one day we were gathering to make a cook. And my fellow colleagues, I just saw them went to Giant's food store, and they buy the chicken, they come and wash it and just put it in the oven. And I'm saying, are they crazy? because I know you have to, season it up and put some nice spices and herbs, and so that when you start eating that thing, you start chewing on the bones. You just can't just wash it and put it in the oven. So that's the way historically we have cooked like that. As a matter of fact, there's a historical perspective to that. And don't let them tell you that high blood pressure, that we are like doomed to have high blood pressure. It's not true. A lot of it has to do with our lifestyle. There are tribes in Africa, which we are descendants from these people, who have absolutely no high blood pressure at all. But we also look at the historical perspective, because from slavery, we had to eat the parts of the meats that was not palatable. So we have to highly season it. So a lot of us inherit that from our parents, because when our parents prepare our food, it's tasty, but it's highly seasoned and full of a lot of salts. So we have to now get into the habit where we try not to have that palatable taste where there's a lot of salt in our food. Because just cutting back on your salt, you can decrease your blood pressure. Another thing that we tend to take lightly is exercise. If you exercise every day or even 3 times a week, you're going to bring your blood pressure down by 10 points just from doing exercise. I tell my friends who are retired, don't let them give you a recliner, because there's so much entertainment now, not just the politics, but so much entertainment that a lot of us just sit back there and we just spend our lives just not doing anything. Remember, a body in motion stays in motion. So we got to get moving. And it's one of the best things. When I get to cholesterol, you're going to also see the benefit of exercising to increase that good cholesterol, which acts like a rotor-rooter and clean your blood vessel, also gives you longevity. So exercise brings your blood pressure down. So the first time that your blood pressure was high, that's not a diagnosis of hypertension. Normally, if you have no diabetes, no heart disease, we really, really like your blood pressure to be the top number less than 140, the bottom number less than 90. The top number is when the heart squeezes. That's what sends the blood to the brain. The bottom number is when the heart relaxes. So those numbers, we like it to be below those numbers. So when you get the first number, because there are several things that could raise your blood pressure. If you're anxious, your blood pressure is going to go up. If you have pain, your blood pressure is going to go up. If you have infection, your blood pressure is going to go up. Those are natural responses of the body. So not the first reading. So if you have the second reading on its high and the third reading on its high, then you need to do something about it. So as I discussed, cut back on your salt, exercise. If these didn't work, you see your doctor. And don't let, a lot of times you read in magazines and on the internet that these medicines are poison, especially the males, because they're afraid that the medicine gonna cause them erectile dysfunction. Less likely. There are certain medicines that really, like the beta blockers. So anything that ends in OL, atenolol, metoprolol, toprol, those are beta blockers. They are high blood pressure medicines, but we only give them to males if you have heart disease, because they are very important medicine. If you have a heart attack, they help to take away the pressure from the heart. But if not, there are lots of different options that we can use that we can bring your blood pressure down. Because while you are worried about the blood pressure medicine on your function, on how you perform, your performance, the disease itself more likely to cause you to have problems. Some guys tell me, doctor, I would die happy. But let's be wise and let's be reasonable, because Paul has asked us to do that. Sometimes when I do these presentations, I'm always reminded one thing about America. It's the only place in the world that you have the right to be stupid. So when you see information, even on the internet, there's a lot of stuff out there that really does not make sense, but a lot of us, we gather it and take it for gospel. But really seek your help. And I know I don't want to take up all your time, most of the time. I'm going to just go on to cholesterol. You need to go to the doctor or at least have a test for your cholesterol. Because again, these are risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And you've got to know your numbers, all right? So when we talk about cholesterol, there's two types of cholesterol. There's good cholesterol and there's bad cholesterol. It seems as though the word cholesterol should be a bad thing. But there's good cholesterol and there's bad cholesterol. When we talk about good cholesterol, it's the HDL, high-density lipoprotein. And if you want to remember good cholesterol, H for heaven. All right, so when you go to your doctor, don't just let the doctor tell you your numbers are good. A lot of patients, they just satisfy the doctor so that everything is okay because all he's studying to see the next patient and to go on to the next person. But you're paying for this. This is not free. All right, you're paying for this, so know your numbers. So ask the doctors what these numbers mean. And if you don't get a chance today, then, I could show you every patient that come to my office, I actually draw little papers and, little diagrams so that these things, they're not rocket science. Really, it's not that hard. So when we talk about cholesterol, your total cholesterol, which is the good cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, and there's a subset called the VLDL, the total should be less than 200. So know those numbers. Less than 200 is what you're looking for. The good cholesterol, which is the HDL, and we said H for heaven, we like that to be very high. The reason why we want that to be high, the reason why we call it good, it has the ability to get under the plaques in the lining of the arteries because that's where the cholesterol is. When you eat a meal, if you don't burn up that glucose, everything that we eat turns to glucose. If you don't burn that glucose, you store it as fat and as cholesterol. So you want to keep that cholesterol to a minimal. So that that cholesterol is stored in the lining of the blood vessel. And historically, we see that starts at age 10 in a child as a fatty streak. But you know what? We are seeing those now in babies that are born. All because a lot of the foods that we eat, they're processed, they're very high in calories but low in nutrients. So you want, think about what you're putting in your body, healthy stuff. So the HDL, the reason why we call it good cholesterol, it has the ability to literally go inside the blood vessel. Remember, these blood vessels, they're feeding the heart, so the heart could get nutrients to pump, to send blood to the brain. And even the blood vessels in the brain, you want them to be as clear as possible. So the HDL, it almost acts like a rotor-rooter. It takes that cholesterol that's stored, take it to your liver, and get rid of it. So you want it to be as high as possible. So typically in males, we want that to be more than 40. In females, greater than 50. But anyone that could get their HDL above 60, it gives them longevity. All right? So the way to get that, as a matter of fact, there was a population study that shows that if your HDL is above 60, you generally live between 80s and 100. Not only that, you generally don't get dementia. So that's how good, that's how important it is. The number one way to increase your HDL is exercise. Exercise builds it, tobacco suppresses it. So you got to find some way. There was a population study that was done, and this was done on women, just simple because I'm not asking you to go run a marathon. Just simple. If you walk half an hour a day, 3 times a week, you're going to add 2.5 years to your life. If you take that up to 5 times a week, just a half an hour, you're going to add 4.9 years to your life. A British study shows that if you do 1 hour, and it also shows that if you eat between 5 to 7 servings of fruits and vegetables daily, and if you don't smoke, and they suggest that if you drink a glass of wine, I don't drink wine, but a French study shows that you could also get it from grapes. So the British study shows that if you do that, you're going to add 14 years to your life, and it starts from the very day that you start. All right, so know those numbers when you go to the doctor. So the HDL, it's one of the most important aspects of the cholesterol. There's also another aspect of that HDL. If your HDL, that good cholesterol, if it's less than 35, it adds a strike to you. It now becomes an independent risk factor. Most people that we see who have heart attacks in their 20s and in their 30s, in their 40s and 50s, most of them have HDL that are low. So try to build your HDL. Some people genetically have low HDL. If you are of Italian heritage, there are certain places in Italy where they have low HDL, but there are two types, HDL2 and HDL3, and they tend to have the one that is very protective. Moving on, the LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, we want that to be as low. So we want your good cholesterol to be high because it cleans the blood vessel, and we want your bad cholesterol to be low because that's what builds the plaque. Because what causes a heart attack or stroke? It doesn't take much. Typically, we normally should see cardiovascular disease as a disease of aging. By aging, when you get into your 70s and 80s, that's when we should see it. But as I show, we are seeing it even at birth. So what we need, the Bible tells us in the last days, men's heart shall be failing them for fear. So stress and all these different things can create that inflammation that causes plaque to rupture. Because all it takes is for plaque to rupture regardless of your age. If you remember about 3 years ago, CNN had featured a young girl. She was an athlete. She was from Oregon, an athlete. She was young. She was 21 years old. She was a vegan, but yet still she had a massive heart attack. So there's certain factors, and a lot of times we cannot predict who will have one. All right? We cannot predict. So what we have to do is decrease our risk factors as much as possible. The other problem I want to talk about is diabetes. A lot of us sitting right in front of me have diabetes. Diabetes is one of the worst diseases that you could have, to the point where 2 years ago, there's a question that came up around the medical circles, and we never thought that this question would ever come up. If you have to choose between diabetes and HIV, which one would you choose? I think that's a slam dunk, But diabetes is such a delicate disease and a destructive disease that question now comes into play. Because when you have diabetes, you are considered as though you already have coronary artery disease. And that's why the parameters that we use for blood pressure is different. The parameters that we use for cholesterol is different when you're diabetic. So if you're diabetic, we absolutely need to have your blood pressure below 130 over 80. We also, in that cholesterol that I spoke about, especially the bad cholesterol, if you're not diabetic and you don't have heart disease, we like your bad cholesterol to be less than 130. If you're diabetic, it absolutely needs to be less than 100. If you have a history of heart attack or a history of stroke, we like that bad cholesterol to be less than 70. The lower it is, the better it is. How do we diagnose diabetes? A lot of times, if you wait until you have symptoms, and that's why it's so important to go to the doctor at least to get a checkup at least once a year, especially if you have a family history. But even without a family history, just go and get a simple checkup. A lot of us, we work and we have insurance and we don't use it. We don't utilize it. It's not like we are looking for work. There's a lot of work out there for us. We are so busy that a lot of us now, we don't even take more patients. And we know what's coming down the pipe with the administration and the healthcare, which is in the toilet. So we got to take care of our health. If you don't do it, no one else will. So when we look at diabetes, if you have a fasting glucose, so if you fast for 8 hours, your blood sugar should be less than 100. Diabetes is whenever you fast for more than 8 hours, if your blood sugar is greater than 126, you're diabetic. And when that go into your chart, you have done that record, it stays with you for the rest of your life, even though you can bring it down by lifestyle change. So you don't want to get that into your records because insurance use that now and your premiums become doubled. You can't get life insurance. They treat you as though you're going to die soon. So they charge you a lot. So you want to get that fasting blood glucose less than 100. And if, so between 100 and 125, we call these prediabetes or borderline diabetes. Sometimes I choose to put so that the insurance will say you kind of have diabetes, so I would put impaired fasting glucose. And hopefully I talk with my patients and tell them, change your lifestyle, because I don't want to put diabetes in your record because it stands with you. It's almost like a criminal record for the rest of your life. So you don't want to get that there. Now, there's another test that every person who is a diabetic should know, and that's a hemoglobin A1C. If you're a diabetic and you don't know about that, your doctor owes you some money, because it's almost malpractice if you are diabetic and don't know what your A1C is. So the hemoglobin A1C, it's a test, it's a blood test that we use, and that blood test can give us an idea how well your blood sugar is controlled over the past 3 months. Because fasting blood glucose is a glucose in time. So if you fast, let's say when you go to do your test, if you fast for 8 hours and your blood sugar is like 130, if you had fasted another 2 hours, it might come down to 115. If you had fasted for another 2 hours, it might come down to 93. So it gives you a false sense that you don't have anything. But fasting does not affect the hemoglobin A1C. That test was developed in Boston. It's one of the biggest diabetic tests that studies that was done, over 25,000 patients. So that makes it very authentic. A normal hemoglobin A1C is between 4.5 and 5.7. That's where normal is. 5.8 to 6.4 is the borderline or prediabetes. Anything greater than 6.4, so 6.5 and above, is diabetic. What it tells us that if you are diabetic, the goal is to get that number, keep that number below 7. Because the complications of diabetes, it's the leading cause of blindness. It's also the leading cause of kidney failure. If you go to any dialysis center, these people who are on dialysis, 90% of them have diabetes. So you want to prevent these, what we call end organ damage. It's also the leading cause of amputation. So what the study shows, that if your hemoglobin A1C is less than 7, we could almost guarantee you would not go blind, you would not get kidney failure, and you would not get amputation. There are other complications that people could have, the neuropathy and all that stuff, but we could guarantee you. But if it's above 7, that goes out the window, because you're at increased risk for neuropathy, which is the numbness and tingling in your feet. And the way to distinguish that neuropathy from your back, whenever you have numbness, tingling, pins and needles, it's typically a nerve problem. So in a diabetic, it's a systemic illness. So when you have diabetic neuropathy, to distinguish it, because a lot of us have back problems, herniated discs, to distinguish it, diabetic neuropathy, it's in what we call a stocking glove distribution. So it typically starts at the toes, the bottom of the feet, and it never crosses the midline of your calf. It never crosses. So diabetic neuropathy doesn't come up to your legs. If you have neuropathy from here, it's coming from your back. The same thing, very rare would you have neuropathy in your hands, but again, in a glove distribution, it never crosses here. So those are important things to know. If your doctor don't tell you, you know that for yourself, all right? And that's the reason the bishop, wants you to get information so that we can take charge of our health. There's a lot I could talk about, and the time is going fast, so I'm going to give you a chance to ask questions, and you could ask any question, whether it's about cancer, whether it's about what we just spoke, whether it's about herbal supplement, any question that you want. I'm here by the grace of God to give you wisdom that come from him. He is a great physician. Always tell my patient, it's not me. We could study at Harvard and Yale and wherever we might study. I tell my patient, all healing comes from God. And I believe that with all my heart. So if we can have some questions. Oh, yes, time is up. One question.
What's the one question? Hi, can you talk about dialysis?
Dialysis. So what happened, when you get what we call diabetic nephropathy, typically when you're diabetic, one of the blood tests that is ordered is a kidney function test. But before even the kidney function test, let your doctor order something called a urine microalbumin. when you know what the urine microalbumin is, it can give you a sense whether you start to develop what we call diabetic nephropathy. Because if you pick it up from there, that can be reversed. And that's why all diabetics, we also like them to be on what is called an ACE inhibitor or an angiotensin receptor blocker, because these medicines actually protects the kidney. So there are 5 stages of kidney disease. So normally we look at the BUN and the creatinine. These are waste products that are given off by the kidney. Every day we get rid of these waste products. But there's something called the GFR, which stands for glomerular filtration rate. And a good GFR is well in the hundreds. So teenagers, they have GFR in the hundreds. Even without any disease, as we get older, the GFR goes down. So we are saying that stage 1 kidney disease is a GFR between 74 and 90. Stage 2 is a GFR of 60 to 74. Stage 3 is a GFR of 30 to 59. Stage 4 is a GFR of 15 to 29. And stage 5, which is the last stage when you need dialysis, is a GFR that's less than 15. So what happened is, you know, there's a way that if you have looked at your report, it's going to say that normal is greater than 59. And I always tell the nephrologists, the kidney doctors, that they really should use a different system, because the moment you drop below 59, you're at stage 3 kidney disease. The reason why we use that, if you have stage 3 kidney disease, you have to avoid things like NSAID. So no ibuprofen, no Motrin for pain. You can use safely Tylenol. So when you get to the point where your kidney cannot get rid of these toxins in your body, then we have to use dialysis, which is a machine that now acts as a kidney to get rid of the toxins in your body. So that's the purpose of dialysis. You're committed to have a fistula where they do that exchange, and you go at least 3 times a week to have dialysis. It's a very cumbersome thing, so it's something you should try to prevent. Other options is having a kidney transplant. And like I said, our time is well spent. But I will be around, and I'm really happy to answer any question that you might have and share information. All today is free. You don't have to pay today, so, you know.